What's up, guys? Well, thanks to this Vice Rhino tweet, I'm apparently going to be doing a video about tithing. I know, exciting stuff. So, thanks, Vice Rhino. Thanks to you, I get to suffer through this ordeal of a video.
Sucks to be you, man, but if you didn't stalk my Twitter, maybe you wouldn't have to suffer alongside me. You made your bed, now it's time you slept in it.
Fair enough, I guess. Oh crap, it's been a while and we haven't even gotten into the fan art yet, because apparently that's a thing that I do now. First off, we have this Zuckerberg Suris from Half a Stone, a version of my avatar that looks way more snarky than I could ever hope to be from Antebellum, a sketch and digital art from Rootski, and then this badass picture that looks like I'm incredibly somber after watching Discount Hoven play in traffic. As usual, guys, your art is awesome, and I thank you guys for dropping all that stuff in my Discord. Alright, it's almost been a solid minute. Let's go ahead and roll the intro. Snappy intro. I like it.
Welcome to another episode of Real Truth Real Quick. My name's Adam Tarnow, joined as always by Todd Wagner.
Hello, Adam. Hello, friends.
All right, Todd, question today is this. If I'm in debt, should I still tithe?
Ooh, I know this one. No.
Oh, man. All right. So many times, we share the question or respond to the question the way it's been given. So let's just first of all just talk about the tithe. That's a phrase that is often used around circles of people who desire to be faithful to God. And they don't really understand what it means. So there is an entire Real Truth Real Quick on should a Christian still tithe, give 10%, all right? And please watch that. That being said I'm going to phrase it differently. If I'm in debt, should I give to the church? So let's look at what Scripture says, all right? A number of verses that talk about giving. I'll start with one in the Old Testament, Proverbs 3:9, that just simply says this, honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce, okay? Now what's inconspicuously missing from that is unless you're in debt.
Of course it doesn't. Instead of giving to the church out of your excess, which would be at least somewhat admirable, you instead talk about giving the best of your produce to the church. Not what is left over after taking care of yourself and your bills, but starting out by taking care of the church. Let me juxtapose this to what most of the atheist community usually ask for when we plug our Patreon. I can't think of a single person in the atheist community who asks for any type of money if somebody does not have something to give. Speaking from myself personally, I'm more than happy when people just share my videos out and give them more views or like them or any of that. Stuff like that helps the channel just as much as Patreon, although Patreon also helps because groceries are, neat. But I'll say it now, and I'll probably say it every other time, if you don't have money to donate, then simply don't donate. If you do have money to donate, don't feel compelled to donate. There's nothing compulsory about something like a Patreon donation for a channel that throws out free content. What you're talking about, though, is completely compulsory, though. Unlike the church.
Doesn't say that. 1 Corinthians 16:2, it says this, on the first day of the week, Paul wants the Corinthians to put aside each of them and save. The saving, if you read 1 Corinthians 15, 16 and around it, was to save, to be able to give to other churches that were in need, other members of the Christian community that had some need of knowing God's care and provision for them. Okay? It says, give as you have prospered, so that no collections have to be made when I show up. So, and it doesn't say, unless you're in debt. All right? It does say, as you have prospered, which probably while you're in debt, you can't give as much, which is one of the reasons you want to get out of debt.
Actually, I'm pretty sure that most thinking, functioning human beings want to get out of debt so that they can afford the amount of food and shelter necessary to keep themselves alive. Past that, they might want to get out of debt so that they can afford medical expenses. To afford not dying. Notice how none of that has anything to do with the church, though. I've never heard somebody actually utter the phrase, my crippling student debt is so hard, I wish I wasn't in it so that I could give money to my church. If you do think that, then maybe your priorities are just a little bit skewed. Take care of yourself. And can I just say that this repeated compunction that people should give to their church and should tithe even when they don't have the money to is just a little bit just kind of morally repugnant.
2 Corinthians chapter 9 verses 6 and 7. Paul is writing back to the same folks. He's getting now closer to coming to them, and he says this, the one who sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. And so he says, I want each of you guys to give as you have purposed in your heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion.
But you're talking about this as if it's a pretty universal law. That pretty much means that you're tithing under compunction. There's really no two ways about it. If somebody's in debt and therefore literally doesn't have the money to give, because if you're in debt, then you actually don't own that money, it's already owed to somebody else, but you're still asking them to give, there's no two ways about that being under compunction. It's under compulsion too, which is the word you used. I think I like compunction a little better here though, since it implies a form of guilt tripping.
For God loves a cheerful giver, and it doesn't say you don't have to give cheerfully or anyway if you're in debt. Leaves it out. All right? And then finally, 1 Timothy 6:18 just says this: instruct those in this world that have experienced some form of blessing, and debt is not a blessing. It's why it says in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7, that the borrower is a lender's slave. And so you don't want to be in debt. But if you are, okay, it doesn't still mean you don't have provision. And it says that all men, and specifically those that have provision for themselves, are to do good, to be rich in good works, and to be generous.
What a disgustingly manipulative tactic. I'm sorry, but if you're in debt, you do not need to be giving your money to your church. There are other people who aren't in debt, or who are in debt and are giving anyway, who are already giving to your church. Trying to go and cherry pick pieces out of the Bible to say that people should give even when they're in debt, and that they should be happy about it and generous about it, is manipulation of the lowest stature. And again, there's really no two ways about it. I don't think there's any type of word games you can use to argue yourself out of the fact that you're asking people to give out of what they don't have. And what's worse is that the authority backing you is supposedly a higher power. A higher power that I would think doesn't need people's individual dollars in order to function. God doesn't run on dollar bills, and I'm sure that God has enough power to provide for his church. Unless your church isn't the true church, in which case you won't. Does that mean that if your church won't survive without having any tithes, that it's not the true church? Except that no church would survive without any donations. That's because churches don't provide any essential services. At least, no services that are contingent on them being a church. I know there are some churches that run charities and food drives, but you can have those without it being a church. There are a lot of churches that provide community spaces for the people around them. But again, those community spaces can be found in literally every other hobby that has any place for you to go. So again, what actual purpose does a brick and mortar church serve? The answer to that, at least for me, is none that I would donate to. If I want to donate my dollars to feed the homeless, then I'm going to donate to a charity that is focused on feeding the homeless, not a church that just happens to do it every so often. I should also add that he snuck in that little bit about how your blessings are going to multiply if you give more. That's not exactly true. We can guarantee that the church's blessings will multiply when you give more, but I mean, if you give more to anybody, their blessings would multiply, I'm sure. But giving money to the church is not like dropping money in a stock market portfolio. It doesn't just magically grow and then come back to you in a few years. It's gone and spent on whatever the church needs it to be spent on. I hate to tell you, but that money's gone. There are some people that will try to say that, oh, I gave money to my church and then later I received a blessing of like $13 on the pavement. Except that wasn't a blessing, that was just some poor schmuck who lost $13 and you just happened to grab it. Circumstance and coincidence are almost always more likely than miracle.
And so you want to be as generous as you can. What's great about this, Adam, is again, you've lived through this, right? You and Jackie had some debt. And why don't you share with folks how you looked at this personally, and then we'll talk some more about stuff.
So when we got married almost 15 years ago, the day we said I do, we were sitting on $120,000 in student loan debt.
Wow.
And so we were familiar with those passages that you just read. We were in a financial crisis the day we got married, and when we sat down and said, hey, we want to do something about this, we want to try to pay this debt off, we decided there were three things that we wanted to do financially. We wanted to be able to save regularly, we wanted to be able to pay off our debt aggressively, and we wanted to be able to give generously. And we looked at all three of those, and we looked at the financial situation, we looked at the debt, and just said, I don't think we can do all three of these. We have to pick two. And so, in light of those scriptures, we just said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay off the debt aggressively, and we're going to choose to still give generously. And so we had to wrestle with this.
And you would have paid that student loan off faster had you actually just spent that money that you were giving to the church in the student loan. This would have alleviated your stresses about that student loan. Also, by simply citing this as an example, it's also another hugely gross manipulation tactic. You are the testimonial that said that, hey, I was $120,000 in student debt, which is a big amount, and I was still giving to my church. Now, people are going to look at you as an example and possibly follow your example, sometimes to their downfall. So how about you not try to manipulate and frisk people's hard-earned money when they might not have that money to give in the first place? Actually, it's not really a might. You've specifically brought up a scenario where that money wasn't there to give in the first place and simply said that it needed to be given anyway, and then somehow retroactively claim that the giving isn't under compulsion, when it most certainly is.
And what that meant is we were going to get out of debt a little bit later, because if we could have taken all the extra income and just thrown it at the debt, that might have shaved months off of being free from that debt. But we just said, hey, we want to be able to have that blessing. We want to be able to have that joy, really, is what I mean by that blessing. We want to have that joy of being able to give.
And the only reason that you have that joy for being able to give to your church is because you've been manipulated into thinking that it's the right thing to do and therefore it must be done, also known as compulsion. And look, it's not the fact that you managed to convince yourself that this was the right thing to do that I have issue with. You can do with your money whatever the hell you want. But it is the fact that you're using this as a narrative to try to tell other people who don't have the money to give that they need to be giving to the church anyway. That's the part I hold umbrage with. That's the part that is manipulating your audience. And that's the part that I'm trying to showcase here as morally repulsive.
And so we gave generously while we paid off the debt for years, while we were paying it off for years.
And bottom line, Adam, you're a guy that understood what the scripture says is true, right? Which is this is the commandments of God that we owe, that he gives us his commandments, and his commandments aren't burdensome.
But those commandments are burdensome because they literally increased his financial burden. This is like dealing with an abusive spouse that says that what they're doing isn't bad and that you should feel good about being in a relationship with them even though they're abusive. It's the same style of gross manipulation tactic, and I'm not really okay with it.
Right? And so we have somebody that we know that famously said, right, that giving is the most fun you'll ever have with money.
Yeah.
No, buying a pack of trading cards and cracking it open for the first time is the most fun you'll ever have with money. Or is it buying a new video game? Getting a replacement for your broken hammer? Oh, I see what the problem is. Giving isn't the most fun you'll have with your money unless that's what you personally like to do with your money. If you personally like giving your money, then you'll have more fun doing that. But if you personally like spending your money, then you'll have more fun doing that.
And so what I heard you say is I didn't want to, while I was appropriately paying down my debt, I didn't want to stop experiencing the joy that God intends for me. Absolutely. And so as good as it is to get out of debt, what I don't want to do is stop a good that God has called me to, right? So you probably didn't give as much as you can now that you're debt free, but you still didn't stop giving in that way, because just because you're dealing with debt that you've accumulated doesn't mean that you can't experience the goodness God intends for you.
Isn't giving away money that you don't have when you're stuck in crippling debt such a feel-good experience and topic? No, it's not.
And so there's some way. There is one person that doesn't have to give at all.
That's right.
What person would that be?
That'd be the person that is completely broke.
Has nothing.
Has no income.
Yeah.
Because as it said in those verses, it is to give with the income that you have, with the wealth that is there. So if you have no income, no wealth, then maybe you shouldn't have to give.
You can't be given.
Wait a minute. So let me get this straight. So if I have $0, I therefore can't give you $0, correct? That's fine. That's a logical line of reasoning. But let's say that I have negative $120,000 due to my student loan debt. Now somehow I need to give you dollars, even though I actually have a negative amount of money because that money is actually owed elsewhere. No, that's not how any of this works. I would actually really appreciate it if you would stop telling other people that that is in fact how any of this works, because it's not. If you're in crippling student loan debt, ignore what these jackasses are saying.
So it's wise to give, be as aggressive as you can in paying down your debt. All right. It's wise to save. The scriptures talk a little bit about that. But it's never wise to stop pursuing obedience.
Actually, yes, it is. I think one of the wisest things you can do is to start thinking for yourself instead of letting other people tell you what you should and shouldn't do with your money. You know, as I do an entire episode about talking about what people should and shouldn't do with their money. Trust me, the irony is not lost on me.
All right. And what people need to understand, though, is that God always wants you to give cheerfully. He always wants you to give not begrudgingly. The reason you give is not so that you can get, and the reason you give is not so that God will somehow bless you with more money so you can pay down your debt more aggressively. You give because there's joy in giving. It's more blessed to give than receive. And so you still can tithe when you're in debt.
But earlier you mentioned about giving so as to receive a greater blessing. You tithe a little and you get a smaller blessing. You tithe a lot and you get a larger blessing. But now somehow that narrative has completely gone out the window. You've managed to cherry pick that verse out now that it no longer suits what you're trying to say. And you don't find this in any way problematic?
And I would just encourage you to think of it that way. Not that you have to, because again, it's not a law. Everything that God tells us is to bless us. It's not an obligation. Okay, so giving is not something the law requires. It's not something you have to do. It's a get to do. And so if you know Christ and the goodness of sharing with others, then I would tell you the good news is you get to still give when you're in debt.
That's like saying that somebody should do work for your business for free because working for your business is a privilege. Most people would agree that that's a stupid system and that nobody should follow it, yet somehow some of those same people will agree with what you just said here. Your entire narrative was one about compulsion, and yet you constantly denied that it was about compulsion. If it is an imperative from God that you should tithe, then you cannot try to apologetically weasel your way out of the fact that that is a mandate. Otherwise, any other mandate that comes from God is arbitrary and doesn't need to be followed, which, is a system I'm entirely okay with, being an atheist. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below whether you think that you should actually donate even when you're in debt. What does a church provide that cannot be provided in secular means that requires donating to that church? Also, let me know in the comment section below why it is that a church that is supposedly under the shepherdhood of God should need donations. Anyways, with that said, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe. Go ahead and share it with your friends if you can. And I will see you guys in the next video. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.